Hello YouTube! Last time we looked at Uranium Report was all the way back in February this year. By the way, since then we've already had one more report for the members at myfinancesteacher.org. Recently there are a lot of interesting developments in the uranium market, so let's jump in and we're going to start with the price charts. Looking at the price of uranium, at least since the middle of 2019 and before that generally as well, the uranium cycles lasted for just around 160 days on average. But during these 3 years, the cycle length has actually fluctuated from as little as 104 days to as long as 249 days. The ongoing cycle is now 130 days long, and we've clearly peaked somewhere closer to the midpoint of the cycle, near $64 for uranium. Price has already dropped quite significantly down to $50. The 14-day RSI is down at 29.6, so it's pretty close to getting into oversold area. But based on the duration of these cycles, I think there is perhaps another 3-4 weeks of general downward momentum in uranium prices. Perhaps by the end of the cycle, by the cycle low, uranium price might test this 200-day moving average, and perhaps our cycle low might actually take place somewhere in mid-40s, somewhere around $45. That would also allow the uranium price to give us that repeated poke below wide Bollinger Bands, which often is a sign of a bit of a reversal coming in. Now zooming out a little bit, all the way back to 2011, where might uranium prices reach perhaps in the next cycle or the one after that? One of the obvious targets, perhaps a bit of a resistance zone, is close to the round number of $70, which is also close to that 2011 high. So while in the short term there is perhaps a bit more pain in the uranium markets, in the intermediate to long term uranium is outstandingly promising. Now looking at the uranium equities, that's URA Global X Uranium ETF, with the uranium cycle dropping down into the cycle low, of course URA is dropping as well. Back on Thursday, URA broke below the early 2020 low, just around $19. And with uranium cycle perhaps continuing down for another few weeks for uranium prices to test that 200-day moving average, there is a pretty good chance for URA to continue down as well, retest somewhere around $17, which is a support resistance based on a number of touchdowns. In early 2021 we see a high, a retest of this level in March lows, and another retest of the same level back in August lows. Hence perhaps there is some weakness to expect over the next few weeks, but again in the intermediate term, looking at the 14-day RSI, back on Thursday it's actually been at the most oversold levels all the way since the pandemic drop back in March 2020. So again, dollar cost averaging perhaps somewhere around these levels down into $17 might actually turn out to be a good idea going into the new uranium cycle several weeks to perhaps 1 or 2 months later. And looking at the value of uranium miners, that's URA, over the uranium price, we see that the uranium miners are actually at record oversold levels versus the uranium price itself over the last 77 weeks. So that's around 19 to 20 months records in how oversold uranium producers are versus the uranium price. And I'm sure the weakness in the general stock market is also providing some pressure on a range of equities, including uranium producers. So if uranium prices over the next few weeks only drops, let's say, by $5 down to that 200-day moving average, while URA drops by $3.50 down to that support resistance around $17, that will actually bring this ratio of URA to uranium price even lower, or perhaps one more poke below the relatively wide Bollinger Bands. So that's our view of the technical charts. Moving on to fundamental developments in the uranium markets. One important factor right now is sanctions on Russian exports of uranium, as well as, and perhaps more importantly, the enrichment services. Russia produces less than around 10% of global uranium production, with a big player being Kazakhstan, which produces more than 40% of global production. But looking at enrichment, Russia actually is over 40% of global enrichment capacity. So any sort of sanctions on Russian uranium and enrichment services are likely to play a significant role in the uranium market for the Western investors. Looking at the US, for example, US actually imports 90% of its uranium, so a bit of a curtailment of Russian exports again are likely to significantly push uranium prices higher. Back in March this year, there's been a proposed bill in the US Senate to ban Russian imports of uranium into the US. Supporting these proposed sanctions, Canada's Uranium Resources Minister said that Canada is ready to export more uranium into the US to fill that gap created by potential ban on Russian imports. Shifting the demand for uranium from the East to the Western producers is likely to support the share prices of those producers that constitute the URA and URNM ETFs. Talking about producers, Cameco's CEO has also recently mentioned that the ban on Russian imports of uranium is again very likely. It's so likely, in fact, that the expressions used were when rather than if. Hence, with Russian sanctions being one of the important factors for future prospects in the uranium industry, there are a range of other factors that are going to be discussed in part 2 for the members at myfinanceteacher.org. We're going to look at the Sprott listing in the US, what happened and how is it going to affect the markets going forward. We're going to look at the more details of developments in the enrichment area of the uranium industry. We're going to look at what's happening with the long-term contracts as more and more utilities or nuclear power generators are running out of their stockpiles of uranium. They are likely to start demanding more uranium from producers using these long-term contracts. And you do want to see what is the situation with those long-term contracts at the moment. And additionally, we'll see what are the prospects and outlooks for uranium industry in a range of countries. And beyond that, sometime this month, I also plan part 3 for this May Uranium Report, perhaps for the members at myfinanceteacher.org. So with the first month membership being only $5, it's basically nothing. I do try to build a community of investors for a lively exchange of investing ideas. Come check us out at myfinanceteacher.org. Have a pleasant weekend. Bye-bye.